Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's webinar for Fall 2020 Cross Country. My name is Tom Florian. I'm with the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, and I will serve as your host for this morning's webinar. Joined today by our panelists, Gary Ross of the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union and Jared Chizik of the Iowa High School Athletic Association. They'll be your presenters today to cover all of the return to competition and general guidelines for the Fall 2020 season. Couple of logistics to go over before we begin today's presentation. The chat function of today's webinar has been disabled, but we do encourage you to submit questions using the question and answer Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Go ahead and submit questions throughout the presentation, and either Gary or Jared will do their best to supply answers via text during the presentation, and if time allows, at the end of today's presentation, we will do a live question and answer session then. Please know that this webinar is being recorded. It will be posted to the IHSAA website and IGHSAU website following the presentation today. And we are going to do our best to limit this to 1 hour to respect everyone's time today. So at this time, would like to pass the presentation over to Gary.
Well, again, thanks to everyone for being here. Hopefully everybody is safe and your schools and facilities and everything are safe. We've heard a lot of horror stories already and pictures around the state. So foremost, hope everybody is safe and hopefully able to get back to as much normal as you can. Cross-country meets may consider different formats, and that's a lot of the questions we've had, whether it be staggered, wave, or interval starts. Just the possibility of having different levels run on different nights, possibly separating races. For example, having multiple JV races versus a large JV race. Also consider widening the course to 6 foot. Consider widening the starting grids, including skipping boxes at the starting line. Consider using finish corrals and FAT timing, if not possible. Consider alternate means of finish place and time. Establish cross-country specific social distancing meet protocols as elimination of handshakes before and after the meet. And then the IGHSAU and the IHSAA strongly encourage all participants and spectators to practice social distancing and to wear face covers whenever possible. And again, no hugging, shaking hands, or fist bumps whenever possible. You know, some of the considerations for coaches is consider conducting workouts in pods of same students, always training and rotating together in practice to ensure more limited exposure if someone develops an infection. Interestingly, we've gotten some feedback from different cross-country coach on as they look at how these pods are formed, and some of them, you know, where in the past, maybe you've had your top group all together workouts, now maybe they have split them into different pods so that if there would be a virus or something occurring, that not everybody of their top group, for example, would be impacted. That's just an example of how pods and in consideration how you're going to organize that would be considered. Also, keep accurate records of those athletes and staff who attend each practice in case contact tracing is needed. You know, what the other area that obviously as you start looking at cross country where there is a large gatherings is your team camps. And again, social distance as much as possible from other teams. Also consider the number of individuals within the camp. Consider whether have the sides up to allow airflow through that. So how you conduct and how you do your team camps is probably one of the big areas that regarding social distancing. And in the postseason, we just wanted to make you aware that encourage coaches and administration to be flexible all season long, including the postseason, any adjustments that may need to be made due to the pandemic. As we said, this is a fluid situation and we'll adapt as needed. Some of the considerations for our student athletes: consider making each student responsible for their own supplies, which could include hand sanitizers. Cloth face coverings are permitted. You know, that's one of the aspects that there's these shields that can be pulled up that many runners use anyway. And that is something that we've heard from a number of people that the runners are already using to help with, you know, the transmission of the virus. Bring your own water bottle. And a question we've had is during the race, you know, who can provide water to the runner? It's important to know that the coach, manager, and the parent can, but it's extremely important that you know that only one water bottle per person. You should not share water bottles, and if they are going to use it, they can use it for that meet. And then obviously after the meet, you could do your cleaning and sanitizing for the future. Student athletes, masks will be treated the same as socks. As long as the mask is not offensive and unsporting, they will be allowed. It doesn't have to be a solid color. Start protocols, and this is another area where you gather in large groups. Athletes should have individual bags and locations for their sweats. Avoid the piling of clothing. And also the finish shoots. Obviously we know at times students may need medical attention, but as much as possible, recognize for the athletes to remain upright and walk through the chute so that there isn't a lot of interaction between the workers at the finish and the athletes. Some consideration for officials that they need to be aware of. We have invited them as well. Wash hands and bring hand sanitizer. Follow social distancing guidelines in pre and post meet conferences. Also social distancing regarding the clerking at the start line and posting and tabulation of results. They're strongly encouraged to wear face coverings. Do not shake hands and follow pre and post ceremony guidelines, and electronic whistles would be allowed. Some considerations for parents. Obviously, they're an important part of our sport. To provide personal items for the student and label them. Again, when they attend the meets, the use of cloth face coverings and social distancing is strongly encouraged as much as possible for our non-participants, parents, coaches, officials, and other event volunteers. Some consideration for our administration, and we had a Zoom last week with the ADs regarding all of our fall sports, but this is some of the things we mentioned to them in that Zoom meeting. Facility sanitation. Consider which facilities will need to be sanitized, how often, and who will be doing the sanitizing. Award ceremonies obviously is a big part of cross-country invitationals, but that would be an aspect, again, where you have a large gathering. So consider options that would allow social distancing. Possibly consider not having an award ceremony this year. Strongly recommend that if you do have an award ceremony, that they use face coverings for any individuals attending the award ceremonies if it is held. Limit outside food brought in by teams and spectators. I know this is something, again, that's very traditional, but again, we would say that if you are going to do that, it should be packaged, for example, by your food service or a restaurant. It should not be parents bringing little items here and there. And transportation guidelines, that's obviously needs to be followed. We had them this summer, and again, as schools are going back in session, hopefully your administration has had discussions on how transportation is going to be held. And then consider, this is very, very important, consider establishing a team-based approach to developing a written management protocol for any COVID-19 related issues, which involves your county public health, your school nurse, your athletic trainers, counselors, and Iowa Department of Public Health. Some general guidelines. Again, when you're hosting a cross-country invitational, it's important that the responsibility of the home team, the school, to provide administrative supervision, not the coach. You as coaches have enough to do during your meet, and so it's important that you do have administrative individuals there to assist in following the guidelines. The return to learn competition. At this point, all schools, regardless of return to learn plans, will be eligible to participate. Decision rests with the local schools, and schools deciding not to participate in a sport must send a written notice to Tom Keating at the IHSAA or Gene Berger at the IGHSAU by August 17th. So obviously Tom with the boys and Gene with the girls. Eligibility for students in districts that do not offer one or more fall sports would be to have a cooperative sharing agreement, knowing that the two beds, if you have two schools, the beds would be added together, or to open enroll to another district as long as that open enrollment is approved, and as long as they know that they are only eligible immediately in our sport of cross country, if that's what it is, not in other sports of which their sending district may be offered. And then as per amendment issued by Governor Reynolds on June 25th, all physicals signed or after July 1, 2019 are good through December of 2020. So as you look at your fall rosters and dealing with physicals, July 1 is the date. Anything after that is good through this school, December of this year. All students are eligible for fall sports. So our scholarship rule allows all students to be eligible for the fall, regardless of the return to learn plan. All students must be enrolled in equivalent of 4 full credit courses to be eligible. Regarding any possible positive COVID-19 cases, the Iowa Department of Public Health is developing some guidance for county health departments and schools regarding protocols when a student or student athlete reports symptoms or a positive test or in contact with a person with COVID-19 tests. It's very important to develop that contact with your county Department of Health. Each school should identify a point of contact for athletes, coaches, and other personnel to report when he/she experiences COVID-19 or a positive result or in contact with a person. This person will be responsible to report such situations to your local public health. And you may do that in alignment with your regular school, which might be your nurse or it might be an administrator, but you need to have a common point of contact for all athletes if you do have those items above. Each school should develop a communication plan to notify relevant persons, which could be your players, coaches, spectators, when contact tracing indicates the need to. Again, that's very important to have that communication plan. Health screening, schools should implement health screening for practices and meets, in this case, similar to methods used during baseball and softball. And again, self-screening is critical. When students are back in school though, they need to have some screening prior to going to school. If they do happen to, have the screening prior to school day and they don't leave the facility, they do not have to have another self-screening before they attend practice. But if you're virtual, your students are virtual at that time, prior to going to practice, they would need to have the self-screening that is required. Any individual reporting symptoms and or temperature of 100.4 or higher should be isolated until they can safely transport home. At this point now, Jared's gonna hop in and talk about the rest of the information.
Thanks, Gary. Just with everything else that we've heard regarding COVID-19, kids and coaches and spectators and officials, we need to social distance the best we can for periods of time. We understand the cross-country course is going to be difficult at times, particularly in races, keeping that 6 feet of distance at all times, but let's do the best we can, particularly in practice. When we're talking about coaches giving workouts to students beforehand, when we're running in our pods, when our students are getting ready for practice in the locker room, knowing that they're also going to be potentially sharing a locker room with football players or volleyball or swimmers, coordinating that to limit the number of individuals at one time potentially, or again, encouraging face coverings to be worn at that point to keep them, we cannot maintain that 6 feet of social distancing inside or even outside and we're close together, stretching or anything other pre-practice activities. Again, students, coaches, again, all parties involved are getting encouraged to sanitize their hands with hand sanitizer, warm water, and soap as frequently as possible. Fortunately, in the sport of cross country, there is not a lot of common equipment being used. It's not like it's, as we dealt with baseball and softball, or we're dealing with volleyball and football with literally a ball in place. This is a track and field even with a baton. Fortunately, it is, the common equipment it's simply going to be potentially raising the team camp on meets when we have raising the tent. Again, fortunately here we are in good shape in terms of common equipment being used. Because again, for the most part, it should just be the athlete himself or herself. Again, just sanitizing their hands the best as possible before, during, and after practice. As we've talked about before, again, equipment shared between athletes should be sanitized. Again, in the sport of cross country, that does not happen. There's not much equipment out there that we are looking at. Again, we talk about sharing towels. It should not happen. Again, if kids are wanting to shower after practice, if they are on a hot, humid day, if we're having ice towels or anything else like that, they should have their own at that point. We should not be having Johnny and Billy sharing equipment throughout the day. And again, if towels are being used for whatever reason, they need to be laundered after each practice or meet so they are clean and fresh for the next day. Locker rooms are going to be it's a tough point right now. So I know Todd in our office is dealing with football. again, as we're talking about, the locker room needs to be sanitized every day. We stressed this last week with our athletic directors, and I know there's some clarifying information that was sent out yesterday. You know, every day by each group and every group. So again, if you are a small school that are sharing a locker room facility, your cross-country kids are, again, with your volleyball athletes or your swimmers or your football kids, we're gonna have to coordinate who's in quickly, you know, who's in first, who's out. Again, keep that idea of pods, understanding that if it's a football player that were to be the one that we came down with a positive COVID test, that perhaps the cross-country kids, again, if they were not in the locker room at the same time, we can show that, and we're not worried about potentially quarantining a cross-country athlete because of being in the locker room at the same point who just happens to be side by side. Again, locker rooms are needed to be cleaned and sanitized every night. The locker is not going to be used, quote, as a storage area for clothing throughout the season. Kids need to be taking their clothing home after practice, after the day of school, to get clean. Because in theory, we are asking custodial staffs in schools to be cleaning those lockers every night. So again, fortunately with cross country, we're looking at a running uniform of some sort, if it's for meets or if it's for practice. So that should be easy to take home. But we should not be having shirts and shorts literally being there all week long. They should need to be going home, and the student or his parents or her parents, someone should be regularly washing that running uniform and those practice outfits prior to coming back. It should be worn once, and we'll do it again. Now, the question is, it says, you know, on this slide, locker room should not be used as a storage area. What that essence is, again, it can be stored during school day. So if for whatever reason, if your kids do not want to store their outfit, their shorts, their shirt, the running uniform, you name it, they do not want to store it in their regular school locker, yes, they could store it in the locker room during the day. The big thing is then at night, the locker needs to be cleared so sanitation can be taking place. Again, we need to stress again with locker rooms, the best we can, 6 feet of social distancing. Again, the rotating of schedules, who's in with each pod. If we have a large cross-country program of 50, 60 kids or larger than that, understanding that, okay, is our varsity going to go in first, followed by our JV, followed by our freshman soft runners. Again, encouraging everybody to wear masks the best they can while they are in the locker room, understanding that where we at with ventilation. Again, we are now working with an indoor facility, something that we did not do in the summer with baseball and softball. And again, the idea of visiting locker rooms really does not apply much in the sport of cross country. As Gary's already mentioned, each student athlete needs to have their own water container. Again, we've already been asked about meets on warm days. Can we still, as a coach or a manager or as a parent, can we still distribute water to our kids? Yes, you certainly can. But we simply cannot, Gary and I cannot share a water bottle at the 1.5 mile marker here in Boone. We need to have our own. It needs to say Jared. It needs to say Gary. So we understand what's going on, so we're not cross-contaminating at that point. Again, coolers can be used in your team camp after, for prior to or after races. Again, but if they are using the cooler, individuals must sanitize their hands prior to using and grabbing that beverage from the cooler. Again, a little different than what we did this summer with baseball and softball. We're allowing managers or an individual, it can be a coach, it can be a member of the team, it can be a manager, to fill water bottles, but they should also, if they're filling a water bottle or turning on the spigot, they need to be wearing a mask and gloves. And again, as with any meet, if someone would like to fill up water bottles, we would encourage the host to allow or to consider participating schools the opportunity to fill up their water bottles if possible, but at least the participating teams need to bring their own cooler. We've had a couple questions already early in this season regarding spectators in cross country. At this current time, the Athletic Association and Girls Union, we are not limiting spectators for any meets. However, local school districts can limit the number of spectators or prohibit spectators at regular season competitions. With that being said, as we've communicated with schools, already, those who have asked. The state meet and the state qualifying meet, we do plan on having spectators there. Again, as Gary said, we need to be flexible because this whole situation is fluid, because we do not know at this point if we are going to see a traditional state qualifying or traditional state meet. But again, spectators, local decision on who can be there. Spectators, again, we are not requiring masks to be worn by spectators, but again, the local host school can implement that requirement. We are still using CDC guidelines and local Department of Public Health guidelines regarding how big can a gathering be and whether or not we can be social distance. Fortunately, with a 5K course, I'd like to think that people can be social distance a great great deal on the cross country course. But just as with our student athletes, we know the start and the finish areas are going to be where there's not going to be much social distancing taking place. But throughout the course, again, greatly in the middle of that course, we should have fans spread out the best we can. And again, if we cannot maintain social distancing, the best is we need to require the use of masks if we can't be 6 feet apart. We are not prohibiting the media from covering cross-country meets or coming to your practice to get a preview of your season or to get a recap of how your meet went last week. We are simply asking the media to work with your athletic administrator as to when you can schedule a time to meet with the media. So you're prepared as a coach, your administrator is prepared to see that member of the media, and your kids are prepared. So it's understanding that we're not in the middle of a workout and the member of the media shows up. Let's do it before or after practice, just again, to maintain the best social distancing we can and to limit exposure to members outside of your teams. For individuals that are needing to receive treatment after practice or meets, for shin splints, for athletes needing ice, perhaps a sprained ankle for wearing some poor shoes, whatever could happen. We are asking that students that need to use the training room with your athletic trainer wear a mask at all times. And again, not sure how often, when Gary and I go out to regular season meets, we don't see many schools bringing their own athletic trainer with them. But if you are, and if you're not bringing that athletic trainer, we're asking that if anything prior to your meet needs to happen before you arrive at the event. I understand sometimes that's very easy to do, and sometimes it's not. If you need to do it on site on a cross country course, it's a little easier since you are out in the open. We're not worried about fighting for space in a small confined area that we can expect to see in another fall sport currently going on as well right now. Again, if we're using any cold or hot tubs, only one individual at a time, and those tubs need to be drained, cleaned, and disinfected between individual use at the beginning and end of every day. Most important thing we are talking about right now is this guidance that we have shared with you is for all levels of cross country, meaning we are allowing and encouraging students in the junior high level to participate this fall. So this is 7 through 12 guidance. Both organizations have not shut down junior high sports or are permitting varsity only competition. We'd like to see multiple levels of competition out there, understanding that it is up to local school district control to see what they'd like to present. As we've seen in the past, it's a credit to our coaches to see the growth of the sport in our state. And by offering different levels of cross country this fall, we can continue to grow that sport. Again, a little different than we had to deal with the summer when junior high sports were canceled. Again, Gary and I are not doctors. We don't pretend to be doctors. We know our athletic directors on the call aren't doctors, and they've been in great communication with their local county Department of Public Health and with the Iowa Department of Public Health. As we told our ADs last week, we are still waiting for a flow chart from the State Department of Public Health to help make decisions as to what were to happen if a member of your squad were to come down a positive case or with an exposure. But on your screen right here, as you can see, the contact information for the state Department of Public Health. If there are any questions at this point, please feel free to use the question and answer tab at the bottom to submit those questions. As Gary alluded to earlier, we all need to be flexible this fall. It is our goal to get through this cross-country season. Again, because we believe social distancing can take place. We know, though, the concerns that some have regarding the start and finish of the race. We know there are concerns with transportation and how this could take place. We know there are concerns with some timers out there on doing waves of different kids of starts. We are asking everybody to work with your local at the local district level, working with your conference, working through us if you have questions, working with your timer as to what different options are available for schools out there for meet setup and arrangements. Again, we are not limiting the number of squads to participate in one meet. We trust our local ADs. We trust you as coaches to understand, maybe in the past we've had a 30-team meet. Maybe we've had 1,800 to 2,000 competitors on a single night. Should we be doing that right now in 2020 with a world of COVID-19? We'd like to think that common sense would prevail, that we're not seeing those large meets in a sense that it's just not the kids that we're concerned about, but it's also when mom and dad show up and that 1,800 to 2,000 competitors also brings two or three spectators along with them. Those are some large events, and we're going to need to do our best to do what we can to limit the spread of COVID throughout the state.
All right, Jared, Gary, thank you for your presentation here. We do have a couple questions that have come in, and I'll kind of serve as the MC for the questions. First question here that was submitted: are team pasta suppers allowed, assuming food is served using gloves, masks, and social distancing is observed?
I think that's one of the things that we mentioned earlier, that if you are going to have something of that nature through your food service, where there's individual packages, not the old where everybody brings food and the kids walk through the line and grab that. So I guess from our standpoint and what we've heard is that isn't necessarily a good case, but there are circumstances in which you can do that as long as it's through your food service or through a restaurant type of serving for individually kids.
Next question: are there any recommendations for using caution tape on courses to allow at least 6 feet of social distance between athletes from the spectators?
Jane, officially there's no recommendation, but it certainly can be done. Knowing that most courses in the state still use a single line, we would strongly, our preference, like I said, is still to see a double line course of some sort if it's natural barriers or with it down. I mean, we can talk about what we do in Fort Dodge, and we do put some small fencing, some small poles around certain corners of the course to make sure that we are keeping spectators off the course at that point. But it certainly can be done if you can use flags and pennants like you would do at a track meet to keep your fans back. Just speaking from experience, at the state baseball tournament, when we did our best to zip tie seats, we still had fans cutting those ties and sitting where they'd like to. At least if they see the pennants or the flags or the caution tape, again, you are protecting yourself as a school, and you're also then sending the message to your fans and all spectators that we are trying to run this event in the safest way possible.
Our next question is in regards to timing and finishing. If starting a meet using non-FAT timing system and starting the meet in interval wave format, finish results would be truly based on time and not finish place, correct? Finished places would be sorted by time and the completion all the waves.
That's correct. It would be by time, not by finish if you do in your waves.
And the hard part with that would be if Gary and I are in different waves and we both end up with the same time, we're actually going to probably have the same placing. We're not going to be able to break that. So you may end up with two teams or two individuals in 15th place. So we just keep that in mind when if waves are used, you may not have a 16th place. We may actually have ties along with that.
Our next question, do you recommend using tents at campsites?
You know, Dave, that's one of the things we mentioned in terms of areas to try to consider, you know, whether you want to spread out tents, open up the sides, limit how many you're going to have in there. You know, obviously, the more ways that you can prevent having, you know, people in large groups, the better. You know, we'll consider that a local decision on tents, but obviously that's one of the areas where you have large congregations and a large group gatherings. So that might very well something you decide is not important for your program.
Is there any update on how many people can be in the weight room for workouts?
At the current time, the guidance has not changed from what was released for workouts in July. Again, we are waiting for more information from the Department of Education to update those guidelines.
Has there been any consideration about shortening the cross-country season in an effort to get it in?
I think one of the things that we all are doing are looking at different scenarios and possibilities. Again, as Jared mentioned earlier, it's a fluid situation, and I think the flexibility and patience everybody has is important. I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that, but.
Our next question is related to water bottles on the bus. Are students allowed to have water bottles on the bus as they travel to a meet? What is the definition of an open container for the bus?
Again, I'll say my interpretation, and others can jump in if they differently. If you have a water bottle that's got a sealed cover that you can close it and seal it and protect it, that would be acceptable. But just having like a glass that's open would not be acceptable. I don't know, anybody want to add to that or modify that?
I would just say after softball, the importance of hydration on a bus was addressed. So of course they need water and their water bottles on the bus while they're traveling and to and from, so they are, but again, they're supposed to be able to be closed and sealed in some fashion.
Next question, there are two questions in this submission. Number one, are transportation guidelines the same as they were for baseball and softball? In other words, is there a limit to the number of athletes on a bus?
At the current time, the DE has not updated their guidance, but we've been told it's supposed to come out this week regarding not only for fall sports, but for schools going back in session and how to transport students. If you were not aware, again, how the guidance read is if you did not require students to wear a mask on a bus, on a 77 passenger, you were limited to 13 kids, but students or school districts did have the opportunity to mask their students and to get more individuals on a bus at one point.
And the other question submitted was, if a school has to get into more meets to give all of their athletes an opportunity to compete, does this impact the 10 meet rule, or are we okay as long as varsity athletes are not running in more than 10 meets?
I would say the big thing with the 10 meet rule is, remember, it's for each level. So it's just not necessarily 10 varsity meets or only have 10 meets here at Boone. It is, I have 10 meets as a varsity team, as a JV team, like JV A, JV B, soft A, soft B, freshman A, freshman B. So you have all that flexibility from a team rule. And the most important thing though, along with that, is no athlete participates in more than 10 meets. That does not include the state qualifying or the state meet.
And this was more of a suggestion submitted as opposed to a question, but it's a suggestion for the start line. Instead of waves or staggers, pick a point 200 to 400 yards in the race and measure back to individual team boxes that are spread out and separate from one another by about 10 meters or so. And then that keeps the team spread out at the start, and the race itself will spread them out over the first 400 or so. Just an idea. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Is that allowed by rule, Jared?
From our guidance from the Federation, I think there's a lot of things allowed by rule right now to be flexible for the sport of cross country. As we stated in our guidance initially, again, as we talk about state qualifying and the state meet, again, things can change, but we are still planning on the mass start for those two races. We'll see where we're at come the last 2 weeks in October and where we need to potentially adjust, but that is where we're at right now. We are definitely taking a wait and see approach before we implement anything drastic compared to maybe what has been done differently. Trust us, and that Gary and I and both staffs have worked on different ideas on potentially what could happen when we get to state qualifying and the state meet. As like you, we would like to get to the end of October, and we'd like to be able to crown a state champion, just both for a team and an individual in all 4 classes.
All right. Well, at this time, there are no other questions that are outstanding. I just want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded. Feel free to submit any last-minute questions here in the next 30 seconds or so before we wrap up. But otherwise, we'd like to thank our panelists, Jared Chizik of the Iowa High School Athletic Association, Gary Ross of the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union, and we'd like to thank Jean Berger, Executive Director of the Girls Athletic Union, for joining us as well. Again, we wish you all the best this upcoming fall season. We know you're going to work really hard to make sure this is a safe experience for our student athletes, coaches, and spectators. So thank you all for the work that you will be doing this fall. And as always, please feel free to reach out to Jared or Gary with questions as they come up, and we'll do our best to provide information as it becomes available throughout the season. We did have one final question come in that I'd like to answer here before we let everyone go. Is there any talk of separating the state meet by classes or gender?
I think that's what Jared was alluding to, is we need to be flexible because we're not sure what it'll be at the end of the year. So obviously that is an option, you know, as a lot of different options are. So that's a possibility.
All right. Well, thank you again for your presentation, and thank you all for joining us. Again, we wish you all the best this fall season, and good luck.